Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And this is Thursday afternoon in Los Angeles, and I suppose it would be best to say that we are here with a group of very serious students and taking up some major questions and answers regarding the nature of the message itself and of the work and of the way of work. And the first has to do with the subject of healing and teaching, and more particularly the part that is played by the letter of truth and the spirit of truth. Now, I'm speaking to you from the standpoint of the message of the infinite way. And more particularly, I'm speaking to you from my 30 years of experience in this work and what it has taught me and how my own work has evolved out of it. To begin with, if a person, by the grace of God, is given a healing consciousness, the letter of truth doesn't enter into healing at all. A person who has received the Christ, I'm going to speak now in the sense that the Master referred to when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained to heal the sick." Now, if such an experience comes into the life of one, and it came into mine, entirely unexpected and undeserved, it just happened, then the letter of truth, the argument or treatment, is entirely unnecessary because actually it's unknown. And healing work takes place without any knowing of the truth, without even a knowledge of the principles of truth. Now, this has no relationship to faith healing because no faith is required. It has no relationship to evangelical healing because no suggestion is needed, and it is actually the Spirit is upon one, and automatically it heals without that individual even knowing what is taking place or why. But then you find that if you wanted to tell someone else what was taking place or how to heal, you'd be absolutely lost because you wouldn't know yourself. And that also is what happened to me, and that is what started me to searching for principles. Now, after I began to receive the unfoldments of principles, I saw a lot of things that before were not plain to me. For instance, I was functioning then with the Christian Science movement, but not using any of its teachings in the way of treatment or anything of that nature because I couldn't understand them. They weren't clear to me. But after these principles began to be revealed to me, I saw why some of them were absolutely true and some were absolutely incorrect. At that time, I had no knowledge at all of any of the New Thought movements or any of its teachings. But when I did, I also saw why they were falling down in healings, because so much that they were teaching was given to them in the beginning, and they accepted it without ever investigating to find out whether or not it was true. And the fact that it wasn't true and wasn't successful didn't even set them to investigating why. They seemed to be more or less satisfied to have failures and failures and failures, and watch their movement decrease and decrease and decrease until now, I imagine, that there isn't 10% of the New Thought movement left anywhere in the world that there was 30 years ago. Now, the reason is mistakes, errors in basic premises. And as these revelations came, they formed, let's call it a pattern, that we call the letter of truth. So that when we undertake to teach anyone, we teach them these specific principles, and then, if they will work with those principles until a consciousness of them is developed, then healings take place. Now, I explain this. The letter of truth does not heal. For instance, the fact that disease does not exist as a reality, as a God creation, is a truth, but it doesn't heal. If it did, then everybody that had a textbook that said disease isn't a reality would be healed or would start healing, but they don't. It is only when a truth becomes a realized truth that it functions as a healing agency. But then it isn't the statement of truth that's done it, it is the consciousness of that statement that has been attained. And I will illustrate that for you in this way. If you take this principle, omnipotence, all power, you have God as spirit, then you have God as omnipotence, therefore you have spirit as omnipotence, and that means that spirit must be all power. Now, if you accept that principle, you must also accept that matter and its laws are not power, and mind and its laws are not power. Because you can't have spirit, infinite power, and any other power beside it. You have to be logical, one thing or the other. Either spirit alone is power, or you have to wipe out the idea of omnipotence. But if you accept omnipotence, then you must eliminate the belief that matter and its laws, or mind and its laws, can also be power. Now that doesn't change the fact that on the human level of life, matter and its laws are power, and mind and its laws are power. In other words, the germ theory of infection and contagion and so forth, those are actual powers. And they do operate in human consciousness. Or the power of suggestion or mental malpractice. On the human level, these are also powers. And they also operate. But when you lift yourself to the idea of omnipotence and enter that fourth dimensional consciousness, you will actually find that neither matter nor its laws, or mind or its laws, are operative. Therefore, your practitioner, by knowing omnipotence and by knowing that thereby matter and its laws are not operative, that practitioner can heal any disease that has been caused by the laws of infection or contagion or accident, age, anything that operates on a material level. Your practitioner can heal by the awareness, the attained consciousness of omnipotence, of spirit as the only power. Now, your practitioner at that level can also nullify all of mind action. Why? Well, mind, insofar as its relationship to spirit is concerned, is as unreal as matter. There's no more reality to the mental capacities than to the physical capacities in its touch with spirit. And therefore, when, as is often done in metaphysics, when you work from the standpoint that there is a mental cause for a physical disease, while you are operating on the level of that belief, you can get some kind of results with it. But very moment that you enter the spirit, you find that it isn't true that there's a mental cause for physical disease. That the mental cause of disease is as illusory as the disease itself. It's only a human belief. Because what one doctor may say is a mental cause for a disease, another doctor may disagree with. They're only theorizing, and the fact is that anyone who claims at all that there is a specific mental cause for a specific mental disease is practicing with an outmoded, outworn theory that was never true and never successful. In other words, all of these lists that are published, like resentment causes rheumatism and hatred causes cancer, are about as mythical as Jack the Giant Killer. They have absolutely no fact in them, no truth, not even a semblance of truth. That is why recently a movement has started on a worldwide scale to outlaw the practice of psychiatry on the basis that it hasn't proven that it can help anyone, and it has proven that it can harm people. Also, only 2 weeks ago, at a meeting of psychoanalysts, the head announced that they now realize that the entire principle of psychoanalysis is wrong and that they must find new principles from which to work, that the ones with which they're working have proven to be not true. And of course, in the realm of psychology, I have had the personal experience of a psychologist with 22 years active practice tell me they have never witnessed one single healing in 22 years, nor met a psychologist who would claim that they ever witnessed a healing. And Dr. Menninger himself, in a radio broadcast, said that in all of their years they have never yet cured any disease with psychology. So that all of these people who are working from the basis that they can find some specific mental cause for a specific mental disease had better throw that out the window and learn this, that we have been proving for 30 years to be true, that there is a mental cause for disease, but it is only one mental cause, and it's the cause of all disease. And that is the belief in two powers. The belief that there is a power of good and a power of evil. This is the mental belief that produces every bit of discord and inharmony in our experience. And in proportion as you can accept omnipotence, that is, spiritual power, as all power, you will then find that the belief of good and evil does not operate. Now, whether a person is dealing with insanity, alcoholism, drug addiction, whether they are dealing with a court case that involves judges and juries, or witnesses or lawyers, whether a person is dealing with colds, grip, flu, cancers, consumption, or whatever name or nature the error may be, in proportion as they can gain the realization that the only thing that's operating is a universal belief in two powers, in that degree will they begin to do their healing work. In the same way, in metaphysics, as I originally read it, the error was looked for in the mind of an individual, that is, the patient. And the attempt was always made to find what error was in their mind that could be corrected. And I might tell you that it was in the second year of my practice that the revelation was given to me that that entire practice was erroneous, and that there is no error in individual consciousness. There is individual acceptance of an error, but the error is not in the individual consciousness and can never be healed there. The only way that you can remove the error from an individual is by stopping your malpractice of that individual. Once you begin to realize that God constitutes the nature and being of every individual, and that all evil is impersonal, that it all has its rise in that which is called carnal mind or mortal mind, or devil or Satan, you begin immediately to release your patient from whatever it is that's troubling them. As long as you are working with them as a person, finding the error in them and trying to remove it, all you're doing is accentuating it, multiplying it. The very moment that you can look away from your patient and realize, neither do I condemn thee. Why? Because there's no sin in you. The tempter is always the devil, or carnal mind, or mortal mind, and since this is not of God, it is not a power. Now, declaring this will not bring about the healing. This is answering the question. As a matter of fact, I was just reading in the June Reader's Digest this article on diploma mills. And the writer, in order to show the horror of what a diploma mill can be and how terrible its claims, says that this particular diploma mill said in their ads that cancer and consumption does not exist as a reality. And of course they are shocked by that, because everybody knows how real they are. Now, as a matter of fact, that school had no right to put out anything like that, although it's truth. They had no right to put that out, because on the human level of life it's not so. And that ad was going to those on the human level of life where it could be misinterpreted. Now, if it were true that that statement, cancer and consumption have no reality, would heal anybody, then of course they'd be justified in putting that out. But you see, it won't heal anybody even though it's true. The object of a school, of a teacher or teaching, should be to develop the consciousness of the student to the place where the cancer or any form of evil loses its reality. Then they are a practitioner. Then when disease or death or lack of limitation comes into their experience through themselves or another, they have no right then to say to the patient, oh, this cancer has no reality. They only have the right to know that truth within themselves. And if they really have attained the consciousness of it, the disease will disappear, or whatever the condition may be. Then, when it comes to instruction, then you can begin with the milk of the Word to build the student up gradually to where eventually you can say to them, do you not see that in the face of omnipotence, spiritual allness, disease can have no reality, or poverty can have no reality, or injustice can have no reality, mortality can have no reality. Therefore, our point is you must know the correct letter of truth in order to develop a healing consciousness. And you can't develop a healing consciousness by working with premises that aren't spiritually correct. So it is, then, that if our students will work from the premise of omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, all wisdom, spirit as all presence, spirit as all power, and from the basis of impersonalizing the evil, so that they never fasten it onto a person by saying, you must be more loving, or you must be more grateful, or you must be more moral, or you must be more just, or you must be more patient. But understand that you in your true identity are already completely spiritual and perfect, and that this false trait is not of you, but of the carnal mind, and because it's of the carnal mind, it is no power, because the carnal mind is not a God-ordained mind or a God-sustained mind. Now, as you build with that, you will find that you will develop a consciousness of that, and then in the presence of your consciousness, that which has had so much reality begins to lose its reality and disappears. In the same way, and I must illustrate this to you, is the subject of supply. Now, from the standpoint of a great deal of metaphysical work, the attempt is always made to demonstrate supply, which means, of course, demonstrate things or demonstrate conditions. Well, it hasn't worked very well, because not only that so few of the metaphysical students have really demonstrated themselves above what their ordinary human place was in supply, but a great many of the very movements that teach the demonstration of supply can't demonstrate it. Very many of the centers all over the whole nation, and certainly all over the foreign nations, are teaching the demonstration of supply and can't pay their bills, and eventually go out of existence. They'd only stop to realize you can't demonstrate supply. Not metaphysically. You can humanly work hard enough and give enough service and be worthy, you'll get lots of supply on that level, but demonstrating supply metaphysically can't be done. Now, what is the truth about supply? Once you know the truth about supply, you can develop the consciousness of supply, and you can have an infinity of it. You'll never then have any trouble paying bills once you know the truth about supply and practice it until you have developed the consciousness of it. Now, the truth about supply is that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. But unless you first release it and give it back to God, it can't be yours. Next, you can't demonstrate supply while thinking of it in terms of form. Why? It's as if your knowledge were greater than God's. God, I need an automobile. Well, now, wait a minute. That is as far as your limited human experience can take you. You think you need an automobile, but how much different it is when we release what we believe our need is and let God fulfill itself. And then find out whether it's an automobile or an airplane or merely enough money to go out and hire one. In the same way, requests continually come in the mail that I must have a position. And the idea is to demonstrate employment. And how nonsensical that is, when employment isn't always the answer to a person's problem. It may be a business of their own, or it may be some other form of supply that entirely does away with the need for employment. So that, it sounds as if this were just a joke, but it isn't. That someone a couple of weeks ago wrote me in Chicago that the stocks they owned were down, and couldn't I do some work so that they wouldn't lose money on their stocks. Well, it'd be nice to have a way of just putting them back up where you'd like to have them, but I haven't discovered that particular way. Now, when we see supply as something that is not external to us, but internal, when we see supply as that which has no form, because it is the substance which is God, that's the only supply there is. And it's easy to follow me on this. If you would go by a citrus fruit ranch and see the oranges and grapefruit and lemons there and say that is supply, then what's happened to supply the very minute that a wind comes and blows it away, or it's picked and sold, there's no more supply. But that's not true, and we all know that's not true. As long as the life of the tree exists, there is supply. And by waiting, in due season, that supply will come forth made manifest as tangible fruit. But if there were no supply, there never could be fruit. Well, so it is with us. We have what we call currency, money, this form, bills, investments, whatever you want. But this is dead. It can't multiply itself. It can't grow. All it can do is be whatever it is there, and even then, if there isn't somebody to move it about, it will stay there forever dead. Now, the thing is, how does this get into my possession? And the answer is because there is an I, a me, somebody that's functioning behind me or within me or as me, and it is I that eventually come into possession of this. And that I that I am is my supply. And this is only the tangible evidence of how much realization of my God being I have. If I have this in meager amounts, it only means that I do not have very much of an awareness of myself. If I have it in larger amounts, it represents the degree of God awareness that I have attained, because the greater our understanding of the truth that the I of me is God, the less problem I have with lack and limitation. The more I can realize that the substance of my being is God, God is the multiplier, God is the substance of that which is multiplied, God, the I of my being, the spiritual entity and identity of me, this is my supply, this is my substance, and my life. And my life is the substance of the fruit. And so if I need an automobile, or if I need an airplane, or if I need money, or if I need a publisher, or if I need a student body, then my life is the substance of that. And as long as I have the awareness of God as my life, that will take form outwardly in its due season. An automobile when an automobile is needed, or a student when a student is needed, or a book when a book is needed, whatever it may be. Now, as a human being, I cannot even pretend to know what is good for me tomorrow. I have no way of knowing humanly. Even though I've made arrangements of where to be tomorrow, I couldn't really say now that I want to set my wisdom up against God's on that point, so that even if between now and tomorrow the voice of God should say, don't be where you think you're going to be, but be somewhere else, I am sufficiently listening and I would hear it, and I'd be where I'm told to be. In other words, I am never praying where I should be tomorrow, or what I should be doing tomorrow, or what should be happening, because I would be setting my intelligence up against that of God. So that if our students will temporarily forget the subject of the form of supply and dwell constantly in the realization of God as supply, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and infinite, and then rest in that, they will find the forms of supply will always appear in due season. Now, because I say to you, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, there is no such thing as personal possession, and Son, all that I have is thine, it doesn't mean that because you have now learned that truth, that by tomorrow you are going to have a large multiplication of supply in form. It only means that if you abide with this principle, if you will live morning, noon, and night in the realization, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Yes, if I look down from a plane, I can see that easily. This whole round ball belongs to God. How can any man claim that he has a deed to it? No, that which we call ownership is merely a temporary loan. But the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. All the crops in the ground and all the cattle on 1,000 hills. Man couldn't make one of these. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all that the Father hath is mine. All that God is, I am. Heir of God, joint heir, not by right of labor or worry, not even by right of knowing a lot of truth, but by the right of inheritance. All that the Father hath is mine. Now, if we will dwell in that, gradually it will bring about a transformation in our consciousness. We will lose our fear of the outer world. We lose our vision that's always looking out there for something to come to us. We will stop being concerned about our temporary needs. And gradually a new consciousness develops in which a sense of non-attachment comes up. We're no longer attached to the need for something out here. Now we're dwelling inwardly in the assurance of, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And with that gaze in that direction, this new consciousness begins to appear outwardly as supply. And then we find that we'll either be led to our rightful employment, our rightful activity, our rightful source of income, or We'll be led to some act of service, which in turn will return to us in form of tangible supply. And all of this without taking thought. The only thought-taking we need is the truth, the letter of truth, which is, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Son, all that I have is thine. And abiding in that, the consciousness of truth develops, just as it did with the disease. The moment you begin to know that evil is not personal, it did not rise in your patient because they were unkind, or because they were sensual, or because they were unjust, or because they were dishonest or immoral. It had no rise in them in that way at all. It was completely impersonal. The very moment you realize that, and the moment you realize not only is it impersonal, but because it isn't ordained of God, it's impotent. It has no power. It has no law. You develop that consciousness. Then, as you have that consciousness, you will understand why the Master could say to the cripple, what did hinder you? What did hinder? He didn't say what caused it in you. What did hinder you? What power is there preventing you from rising? If God is omnipotent, there is no other power, so come on, get up and walk. Then you'll understand why the Master could say to a blind man, open your eyes. Not say, I'll pray to God for you, and not say, well, let's see whether your parents sinned or your grandparents, or whether you have the wrong kind of neighbors, but open your eyes. In other words, there is no power in this mental or physical causation. There is only power in the spiritual causation, which is God. As you abide in those principles, you are developing that state of consciousness. Now, for the first years of the Infinite Way work, while we taught these principles, we did not teach them separate and apart from the message as a whole. And the reason was that I knew that these principles would do no one any good unless they could develop the consciousness along with them. In other words, it would just give them another few pages of rules, something to memorize, and the belief that that was going to heal somebody. And so the teaching remained as it is in the book The Infinite Way and all these other books, so that as you studied the entire book and attained a spiritual consciousness, gradually these principles would stand out and the student would be able to work with them. Now, in these last 2 years, we have done a little differently because we now have so many thousands of students who have studied these books and who have developed some measure of consciousness that we can now, shall I use the word particularize, these principles so that together with their background they can be more definite and more specific in their treatment work and in developing their consciousness, so that we now have a letter, the letter of June, September, October, November 1959, and May and June 1960. Those of you who don't have the older ones can refer to just the May and June 1960, the new ones, and you will see these particular principles specifically stated. Now, don't make the mistake of giving them to a beginner and saying if you learn these principles you'll know what heals, because they won't, and they won't work. They will only work as consciousness is developed. But if you who have been studying and reading or listening to tapes, if you will take these and say, these are the particular principles, these specific principles, and work those in with your consciousness, you will soon find, and it won't take you very long, to find that you really have something that makes illness dissolve quickly. You'll find your healing work multiplying and multiplying over and over again, because your degree of consciousness developed through these specific principles will do it. And so the same thing with supply. Whether it's your own supply, or whether you're responsible for the supply of your movement, or the supply of patients or students who come to you, you will find that supply will evolve abundantly. Now, don't look for the kind of miracles where a $1,000 bill falls at your feet in the street, or gold comes out of a fish's mouth, because you go to jail with that kind of a demonstration. It's against the law to have gold, so don't try to have that kind of a miracle, or even to have bills fall out of the air. Some people try that, but the government has a wrong way of looking at it. But by realizing, and particularly looking out into your gardens and noting how foolish it is for me to claim that rose bush. How foolish. A rose bush, me. How could I ever produce a rose bush? Take God away and there'd be no rose bush. Why, certainly that rose bush belongs to God, and it's mine for my enjoyment. And so it would be with a fruit tree, or a farm, or a ranch, or cattle ranch. To think that a horse belongs to me? No, that's a work of God. The horse is given to us for use. But God is the source of all that is. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, all that is therein. And then as you release this into the impersonal and universal, and then realize, why, certainly, all that God has is ours for our use. All that God has is ours. The manna falls fresh every day. We're not dependent on yesterday's manna. We have no right to be. We should be able to forget our yesterdays and abide in the realization that manna falls fresh every day. Where I am, God is. And all that God is where I am. And this is true every day. We develop that consciousness, and the first thing you know, you'll find supply increasing until it becomes sufficient, and then abundant, and then 12 baskets full left over to share. And so we have then the development of the spirit of truth through the knowledge of the letter of truth. Now then comes the question of patient's responsibility. To begin with, and we're assuming now that it is the patient who has asked for help. We are interested primarily at this moment in those who have turned to us for help, or a wife who has turned for some help for a husband, or husband for wife, or parent for child, or child for parent. The responsibility rests primarily on the practitioner. In other words, when you go to Jesus Christ for a healing, you don't expect him to say, well, I can do it if you read a book, or if you'll read so many passages of a book, or if you'll go to church, or if you'll... You don't expect anything like that. You merely expect him to say, I will help you at once. And that is our attitude. When we are asked for help, the major responsibility is on our shoulder, because, as has been proven, if we really know the truth, 80 to 90% of our patients are going to be healed, and within a very reasonable length of time, too. We have an awful lot of trouble with 10, 15, and sometimes even 20% of the cases that come to us, but that is a long subject. On the whole, 80 to 90% should be very quickly and beautifully handled. And it is, if the students really know the truth and have developed the consciousness. Therefore, the major responsibility is with the practitioner. Now, where the patient does come in, the patient should, above all things, desire spiritual healing. And they should be expecting it and looking for it. If you have a person who asks you for help merely because they want your prayers, while all of the time they're really putting their faith and dependency in medicine, then of course, even with all that you know, you can do very little for them. Once in a while you'll break through, but not too often. Where, what is it? Where the heart is, where the... No, not that one. Where your treasure is. Where your treasure is. And when you find somebody paying a $100 doctor bill and a $2 practitioner bill, you can just about know what the result is going to be. In other words, this is not a work really for part-time or spare change. I use that statement over and over and over again. Don't think you're going to get anywhere in this work on part-time or with spare change. The Master says, when you find the truth, sell all that you have. And do you believe? Leave mother, brother, sister, father for my sake. If you can't put your heart and soul into this, all you're going to get back is what you put in. And if you put in spare time and spare change, you'll get that back. And so these people who are really and truly spending their substance for doctors and medicines and surgery and then sending a dollar bill once in a while to the practitioner or to the metaphysical church, that's what they're getting back. But they're measuring it, remember, by their own standard of consciousness, their own degree. However, the degree of hope, confidence, expectancy that the patient puts in does react upon them in the healing work. Again, let me say that nearly all of us who come to a work of this kind, any of the metaphysical movements, we've really come in the beginning for loaves and fishes. I don't know that there are too many that I've come in contact with who have really started right out and said, all I want is to know God. Usually there's a problem behind that wanting to know God. And we're all in the same boat. Something drove us to it. And that part's all right, because very often it's necessary that we have deep problems before we're willing to turn to God. But the point that I would like to make here is this, that if a patient stays too long in just the belief that what they're looking for is healing and God is just something incidental to it, or truth is incidental to it, you would often find that that patient responds as well as others, or they may once or twice or three times and then find that later it doesn't work anymore. The reason is that as we come into this work, sooner or later we must begin to perceive that God wasn't created for the purpose of healing our bodies or bringing supply to us or being a servant for us. That actually we are that which are supposed to mold ourselves to God, not try to mold God to us. And therefore, at some point in our study, the healing or the demonstration in and of itself becomes secondary to the main thing, which is, to know thee aright. Whom to know aright is life eternal. To find myself home in God. To be one with God again. To know the mysteries of life. Then, even though we're still seeking healing, you will find that because healing has become something secondary, that it also becomes a matter of better and quicker realization and demonstration. There too, there is a little responsibility on the part of the patient, not merely to be, yes, but I must have my rent on Saturday. Oh, yes, but I must get rid of this pain today. And there too, we have this argument come to us from patients over and over again. Well, if I could just know that my rent was, food were taken care of, then I could give myself to finding God. Or the next one will say, oh, if you could just get rid of this pain for me, I'm sure that I will be able to devote more effort to finding God. Or so forth. But you see, it isn't true. Those are subterfuges. If they would devote themselves to finding God, the supply would be there, and the pain would leave, and the disease would leave, and the companionship would come. But no, they can't let loose of those problems long enough to put God first, and therefore many never make their demonstration. It's always, some blind will say, well, you see, if I could just read. And somebody else will say, oh, if my mind would be still so I could meditate. Always there is a reason why. But the point of the matter is that when we really want healing, and where we really know that God is the answer to healing, we'll really go after God with hammer and tongues until we get it, even if we have to discipline ourselves and forget our problems for a while, force ourselves to. So then, there is a little of the patient's responsibility. But the major responsibility always rests with the practitioner, because if the patient knew enough to heal themselves, they'd do it without the practitioner. So never forget, the practitioner has the major responsibility, and the practitioner can point out to the patient as they go along, all right, I know you want this healing, and I know you're entitled to it. We're all entitled to the grace of God. But for the time being now, let us see what we can do with these principles, so forth and so on. Is that clear?
Yes.
Now the practitioner's awareness, and this is regarding the practice, this is the point here. In the presence of light, of course, darkness cannot abide. In a consciousness that is imbued with light, the light of truth, darkness, sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation cannot abide. Therefore, as we individually come into this truth of God's omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, as we come into the awareness, the consciousness of God as the substance of all form, the life and the law of all form, as we come into the consciousness that the nature of evil is always impersonal. It has nothing to do with person except that person is a victim of it, but that it has its rise in the carnal mind or mortal mind, which is but a belief in two powers and therefore is in and of itself no power. As we come into that consciousness, not only do our own problems melt, but the strange thing is, it draws to us all those who have problems. And the clearer we become that all evil is impersonal and impotent, the more people with problems come flocking to us. In other words, the purer we are, the more we are drawing to ourselves those who want to partake of that purity. In other words, when the woman broke through the throng, the master didn't even know she was there. She touched the hem of his robe, and she was healed. And First of all, he didn't know there was any error there to be healed. Secondly, here is a woman with an error that's drawn right to him, not to anybody else in the crowd. Everyone else knew there was lots of error, but she wasn't drawn to them. She was drawn to the one who knew the unreality of evil. And without his even knowing it, or knowing she was there, she was healed. Now you find that same experience in our work, where you will find that many, many people write us for help, cable for help, telegraph, telephone, and are healed before we get the message. And long before they can get an answer to our letter. Now the reason is this. It isn't the body that heals, and it isn't the mind that heals. The mind has no healing qualities whatsoever because the mind is human. It's made up of both good and evil. So it can't be divine. So that it is only the spirit of us, the consciousness of us, that does the healing. But consciousness is not confined to this body. In other words, my consciousness is not confined to this body. In fact, it isn't even in this body. In fact, I'll go further and tell you I am not in this body. And then I'll go a step further and tell you that you are not in your body and that you never were. You never were, you never will be. Therefore, you never will leave the body, not even in death. Because there has been no time in your life, from conception to the grave, when you are ever in your body. And of course, we have an exercise in which, if you practice it faithfully, it'll eventually reveal this truth to you. You look down at your feet right now and ask yourself the question whether those feet are you or whether you are down there in those feet. And then you'll quickly see that those feet are not you and that you are not down there in those feet. Well, you know what would happen if your feet were cut off and you were down in there? You'd be lost. But you see, it's fortunate for you, you aren't in those feet. And so you go up to your knees and you find the self-same thing, that you aren't in the knees and that the knees and the legs do not constitute you. And so you go on all up and down your body, only when you're doing it at home, do it slowly. Do it slowly and do it faithfully. Look at every part of your body and see if you can really find yourself in any part of your body. See if you are encompassed anywhere between your toenails and your hair. And you will ultimately come to the realization, of course you're not in there. And if you were operated from head to foot, no surgeon would ever find you in there. And no autopsy has ever revealed anybody hiding in a body. And so you ultimately do come to see that you are not in your body and you never have been. And then when you ask yourself, well, where am I? Where am I? And what am I? And who am I? And what is this mystery? Because now I have a mystery. I always thought I could look in a mirror and see myself. And now I know that I never saw myself, I saw my body. But I myself wasn't there. Where was I? And where am I? And as you work along that, eventually it'll reveal itself to you why Moses could say, oh, I am that. That I. I am that I. I am that I am. I am that one. That one that we have named God. And I am that one. No wonder I'm not confined in time or space. And so you will find that as you ponder this idea of I, you will also discover that the mind isn't you, that the mind also is an instrument, and that you use the mind in the same way you use the body. Your mind is an instrument, your body is an instrument. If you want to go somewhere, you just have your body go there. If you want to think something, you think it through your mind. But it's always you, independent of mind and body, always you, I, governing and controlling mind and body. And always this I is infinite, impersonal, universal, spiritual, and once you perceive this, you will know that where I am, you are. And where you are, I am. Because strangely enough, there are not 4 billion eyes on earth. There's only one. And so the I of me is the I of you. And so when you write me or telegraph me or cable me, I'm so close to you that I know your need before you get a chance to mail your letter. Therefore, you will see why Jesus did not have to know that somebody was knocking at his door for healing. As long as he was abiding in the truth, I am he. I am that I am. I and my Father are one. And therefore, where my Father is, I am. And where I am, my Father is. Because we are inseparable, indivisible, one. Now, the more you realize that, strangely enough, the more people in darkness will be led to you for that light.